Imagine a man ruling all of China, sitting in gold halls, surrounded by 10,000 women, all brought in to serve his pleasure. And still, it wasn't enough. This is not a legend or a tale from the pages of a twisted novel. This was the reality of Emperor Wu of Jin, a man whose hunger for women was so endless that it became the defining shadow of his reign. Behind the towering palace walls and lacquered gates lay a world few could enter and none could leave, a maze of chambers where thousands of women waited, waiting for a summons that might never come, waiting to be seen, touched, or simply acknowledged, while years drained away in isolation. Who were these women, stripped from their families, renamed, and sealed away to serve as living ornaments for a single man's pleasure? What did it mean to live and die as a concubine in the world's largest harem, where your worth was measured by a single night's favor, your survival dependent on the emperor's passing interest? Tonight, we step into the hidden rooms of a palace filled with thousands of women, forgotten, silenced, and used, all for the insatiable desires of a single emperor. And in this darkness, we will see how one man's hunger could reshape not only the lives of the women trapped in his gilded prison, but the fate of an entire empire. A concubine was not simply a mistress or a lover. She was a woman who lived with a man and had sexual relations with him, but held a lower status than a wife, without the security, rights, or honor that came with being an empress or official consort. In imperial China, concubines were absorbed into the emperor's household like property, ranked below the empress and principal wives, yet still considered crucial to the dynasty's future and the emperor's pleasure. Many concubines came from noble families, offered as tribute to gain favor at court, to seal alliances, or to appease the emperor's demands. Others were selected purely for beauty, young girls taken from provinces under the promise, or threat, of serving in the palace. Some came from impoverished families, where parents believed sending a daughter to the emperor's harem could elevate the family's status, even if it meant sacrificing her freedom and future. Inside the palace, concubines had no right to refuse the emperor. A single nod from him could decide their fate for the day, or for the rest of their lives. They lived under strict palace regulations, unable to leave, watched by eunuchs and policed by senior concubines and the empress herself. Their days were marked by the fear of falling out of favor and the hope of a single night that might lead to the birth of a child, a potential prince who could elevate them from silence to power. But more often, they remained hidden, waiting in chambers, forgotten, aging away behind silk screens while the emperor moved on to others. The weight of their existence reduced to nothing more than the possibility of satisfying the emperor's endless appetite. Sima, who would become Emperor Wu of Jin, was born into a powerful family during one of China's bloodiest eras, the Three Kingdoms period. In 266 CE, he ended this fractured age by usurping the Wei throne, establishing the Jin dynasty, and reuniting China, after nearly a century of relentless warfare. For a moment, there was peace across the empire, and Sima was hailed as a ruler who had ended chaos. Early in his reign, he was known for wise governance, stabilizing the bureaucracy, repairing war-torn lands, and reducing harsh punishments. He sought to build a dynasty that would last, re-establishing Confucian court rituals and promoting agriculture. But as the years passed, the emperor, who once valued order and stability, began to slip into indulgence. With the empire at peace, Sima turned his focus inward, toward expanding his palaces and filling them with pleasure. His court became renowned not for justice but for luxury, feasting, and the endless acquisition of women, as the emperor who had reunited China found himself driven by an appetite that even an empire could not satisfy. Emperor Wu's court was not just a place of governance. It became a palace of women, a living monument to his insatiable desires. Over 10,000 concubines were gathered under his rule, forming one of the largest harems in all of Chinese history. These women came from every corner of the empire. Some were sent as tributes from regional lords, hoping to win favor. Others were offered as gifts from officials eager to climb the ladder of power, and many were forcibly selected during palace recruitment drives where beauty was the only passport into a gilded prison. The reality for most of these women was a silent, lonely existence. Many would never be summoned to the emperor's chambers, even once, living out their entire lives in the shadowy palace compounds, cut off from their families and the world outside. They woke, dressed, and ate within the walls of the inner palace, waiting day after day, year after year, for a summons that might never come. These concubines were organized into strict ranks, with a clear hierarchy determining who could see the emperor and who would remain unseen. A select few, chosen for their beauty, talent, or political connections, might catch the emperor's fleeting attention and bear him children, securing a higher status within the court. But for most, life was a cycle of endless waiting, hushed whispers in dark corridors, and the slow erosion of their identities as they became nothing more than nameless figures among thousands, existing solely for the desires of a single emperor who could never be satisfied. Life as a concubine under Emperor Wu was a paradox of lonely luxury and constant fear. These women lived surrounded by silks, gold screens, and perfumed gardens, yet they were prisoners within the palace walls. They could not step beyond the inner palace grounds without permission, and every hallway was watched by guards and eunuchs who controlled their every movement and reported any disobedience. Strict curfews dictated when they could leave their quarters, and even then, it was only to visit designated areas within the compound. They were inspected regularly for signs of illness or pregnancy, and any rumor of inappropriate contact with eunuchs or guards could lead to harsh punishment or execution. Jealousy was woven into their daily existence. Each concubine lived with the hope of catching the emperor's fleeting attention, for a single night of favor could mean increased status, better quarters, and gifts. But neglect was a slow death sentence, leaving them in isolation, overshadowed by thousands of rivals, with no hope of escape or recognition. The psychological toll was immense. For many, the endless waiting and the unending competition bred despair. Some fell ill and died without fanfare, while others perished during childbirth, another risk they bore without choice. A few took their own lives, unable to endure the endless loneliness, fear of aging into irrelevance, and the oppressive silence of palace life. They were remembered not for who they were but as forgotten bodies within the emperor's unquenchable desire for more. The silk curtains of their chambers, hiding their grief from the world outside. Despite commanding an empire and having over 10,000 concubines within his reach, Emperor Wu of Jin was reportedly never satisfied. His hunger for women became legendary, with officials and regional leaders sending him beautiful young women as tributes to gain favor. Even as the palace overflowed with concubines who would never see him, Wu of Jin kept demanding more, believing that his sexual indulgence was a mark of imperial power and divine blessing. His endless desire was not seen as weakness at the time. Rather, it was viewed as a sign of the emperor's vitality, a symbol that heaven itself favored him with strength. Yet this relentless pursuit drained the empire's resources. Maintaining thousands of women required food, clothing, palace expansions, eunuchs, and guards. Taxes rose, and local officials were pressured to send more tributes of women, straining families and causing resentment across the empire. Records describe nights of endless banquets and drinking, with the emperor surrounded by lines of women, music playing while feasts continued until dawn. It was said he would select concubines at random, sometimes forgetting their names by morning, while others wept silently, knowing they would never receive such notice. All the while, State affairs were neglected, generals went unpaid, and corruption spread among officials, who saw the emperor's distractions as an opportunity to serve themselves. Behind the silk screens and candlelight, while wine spilled onto marble floors and musicians played for hours, the empire's foundations began to crack under the weight of one man's insatiable appetite, his hunger for pleasure leaving a kingdom increasingly unstable and vulnerable. The empire paid dearly for Emperor Wu of Jin's endless hunger. Maintaining a harem of over 10,000 concubines required staggering resources, mountains of rice souks and oils to keep the women clothed, fed, and entertained. The palace grew bloated, with new wings and compounds built to house women, who might never even see the emperor's face, while entire teams of eunuchs and guards patrolled the grounds to keep the concubines confined. All of this drained the imperial treasury, forcing the state to raise taxes on farmers and merchants already recovering from decades of war. Grain that could have fed starving villages went instead to the palace kitchens to prepare lavish feasts, while silk and jewelry meant for trade were redirected to clothe women living in gilded cages. The people outside the palace walls watched their harvests shrink under heavy levies, knowing that their sacrifices funded the emperor's pleasure. Corruption thrived in this environment. Eunuchs and court officials became brokers of palace influence, accepting bribes from families eager to place their daughters in the emperor's eye, hoping for advancement or favor. Competition for the emperor's attention turned palace corridors into quiet battlegrounds, with alliances and rivalries forming among eunuchs and concubines alike. While the emperor indulged in music and women, the foundations of his empire rotted under the weight of mismanagement and exploitation. The laughter and music within the palace masked the grumblings outside, as the emperor's endless appetite became a symbol of the empire's decline. An empire that was being drained not by war, but by one man's insatiable desires. Inside Emperor Wu of Jin's sprawling palace, the harem became a suffocating world of fear, ambition, and quiet tragedy. Thousands of concubines lived side by side, yet for many, it was as if they were already ghosts, their lives spent waiting for a summons that would never come. The rare chance to catch the emperor's eye was seen as the only path to safety or advancement, and so the women turned on one another in desperation. Accusations of witchcraft or misconduct were whispered into the ears of eunuchs, who could be bribed to carry tales to the emperor or block a rival's access to him entirely. Some concubines faked pregnancies, stuffing cloth under their robes in a final gamble for power, hoping to claim they carried the emperor's child and secure their place. Others resorted to poison, slipping powders into rivals' tea or food, eliminating competition in the hope of moving up in the strict ranks of the harem. The palace itself became a gilded prison, filled with women who might go their entire lives without a single visit from the emperor, aging behind painted screens and silk curtains, while rumors of who had been chosen circulated like poison through the air. When these forgotten women died, there was no ceremony or mourning. Their bodies were quietly removed, often buried without family, their names unrecorded. Their lives spent in waiting for a man who never saw them. The walls of the palace hid these tragedies, masking them with the illusion of imperial glory and the emperor's power. But within those walls, fear was constant, alliances were fleeting, and even the softest footsteps could signal betrayal or death. In Emperor Wu's court, survival depended not on kindness or beauty alone, but on cunning, manipulation, and the constant fear that tomorrow might bring exile to a cold, unmarked grave. Concubines in Emperor Wu's palace lived wrapped in silk, surrounded by carved jade screens and the scent of incense, yet beneath this beauty was a suffocating fear that never left them. A single slip of the tongue, an accidental glance at the wrong eunuch, or a rumor whispered by a jealous rival could lead to punishment, confinement, or death. Every day was a balancing act between trying to gain notice and avoiding the dangerous jealousies that notice could bring. As Emperor Wu of Jin aged, the endless banquets, heavy drinking, and constant indulgence in his vast harem began to take their toll. His health deteriorated, his body weakened by the constant strain of excess. Reports from the court described an emperor who spent more time surrounded by entertainers and concubines than with his ministers, drowning in wine and distracted by pleasure while the empire's challenges grew. With the emperor's attention fixed on his personal pleasures, governance fell into neglect. Corruption among eunuchs and officials spread like a disease, each fighting for influence within a court where the emperor's whims determined power. Bribes, favoritism, and unchecked greed hollowed the bureaucracy, while the people outside the palace walls suffered under heavy taxation to fund the emperor's luxury. When Emperor Wu finally died in 290 CE, the empire he had reunited was left fragile, a hollow shell waiting to fracture. His successors proved weak, and the court became a battlefield of ambition and betrayal. Soon, the War of the Eight Princes erupted, plunging the Jin dynasty into chaos and bloodshed as royal relatives tore the empire apart in their scramble for power. The decline of Emperor Wu showed how the personal indulgence of a single ruler, his hunger for pleasure, his neglect of duty, could ripple outward, weakening the foundations of an empire and condemning countless lives to the suffering of war and instability in the wake of his death. Emperor Wu of Jin's reign is often praised for reuniting China after centuries of chaos, a brief moment of stability in a fractured land. Yet beneath this achievement lies a darker shadow, the legacy of his endless hunger for pleasure. His palace overflowing with women, whose lives became nothing more than footnotes to his indulgence. His insatiable appetite became a whispered warning in Chinese history, a reminder of how easily power can be twisted by desire, turning emperors into prisoners of their own pleasures. Ministers and scholars would later cite Wu of Jin as a cautionary tale, proof that when a ruler forgets duty in favor of indulgence, the foundations of the empire crack, leaving chaos to grow in the silence of ignored responsibilities. The concubines, thousands of them, faded from history, their names unrecorded, their stories untold. Taken from families, stripped of identity, living and dying in gilded cages, they became a symbol of the countless lives absorbed, used and discarded in the orbit of imperial power. In the end, the grand halls of Wu of Jin's palace stood quiet, the laughter and music gone, leaving only echoes of the women who once waited in vain for the emperor's call, their lives swallowed by a ruler who never found satisfaction. Power has always demanded a price, but few prices are as chilling as the silent suffering of thousands, locked away behind palace walls for the fleeting pleasure of a single man. Emperor Wu of Jin's obsession was not just a personal indulgence. It was a machine that devoured lives, one quiet, terrified woman at a time. These women, taken from families, renamed, and confined to waiting for a call that might never come, lived and died in silence, their stories erased before they could ever be told. Their youth and hope became currency in the emperor's pursuit of desire, a reminder that the cost of one man's obsession can ripple across an empire. In the end, history remembers the empire he united, but it also remembers the emptiness that indulgence leaves behind. The laughter, the silk, the perfumed halls, all rotted in time, leaving only the memory of wasted lives and a ruler who was never satisfied. History is dark, and we must remember it.